What up, everyone? And here we are at our panel, the Genesis of Fighting Games 30 years later. It's crazy. I am one of your hosts, Kent Ward of Ongaku Overdrive, and with me is...
I am Brotha Kyo of Land of the Free, as well as Serious Impact Works.
We have been invited by Bitfest for their Telethon to talk to you guys about fighting games and pretty much the genesis of where it started.
Heck yeah.
So, it's been about 30 years since Street Fighter II The World Warrior came out. That's
Right.
kind of even though fighting games existed before then, we'll talk a little bit about that. That's pretty much the starting point of fighting games as we know it. So we're going to reflect back on that period of time and what the state of gaming was, what led to Street Fighter II coming out, the other Street Fighter II, and all the crazy stuff that came after. But I don't know, we want to let you know who we are. Of course, I run music shows out of Orlando, Florida.
Right.
I do all kinds of Twitch streaming, content creation. I run the Nerd Music Meltdown podcast. And I don't know, I've just been loving fighting games since day one.
I've been playing video games for as long as I can remember. I do a lot of artwork, I paint. I create a lot of stuff even based off of fighting games that I love so much that I've just been playing for as long as I can remember, you know. They're some of my favorite genres, and I just absolutely just love going and just playing them, you know.
Absolutely. Kyo is a tremendous artist. If you have not followed his stuff on social media, he's pretty much at Brotha Kyo everywhere, so you should definitely check that out.
Yeah.
But clearly, fighting games are a huge part of your life, just as it is mine. But it's influenced you in your artwork, your pretty much your whole lifestyle and all that. And we're going to talk about pretty much what fighting games means to us, but also how it's changed the whole culture. There's a massive culture around fighting games that ties into how people dress, the music they listen to, what they vibe to, and just the kind of friendships they formed over the years. I think it's a beautiful thing for a lot of reasons. One,
that's true.
When it comes to fighting games, they're easy to understand, but also complex to master.
Yeah.
Anyone can pretty much jump in and start learning, start playing, you know. There's a lot of great lore and history and characters. And what other things about fighting games do you like?
Oh, well, I definitely love the amazing soundtrack and the music, behind them, the beautiful artwork and the actual aesthetic behind most of our favorite fighting games. Whether it be a Street Fighter or even a King of Fighters or anything like that. And most importantly, I think just, nothing beats seeing, a crowd of people with, like-minded interests just tapping away at those games, just, at any hour of the day, too.
Yeah, I think one of the other fun things when you bring in that crowd aspect, just the upset value. You never know what's going to happen in a fighting game most of the time. Sometimes you think a certain character or a player is going to win. And
that's right.
The opponent just pulls out something amazing. You have to get that clutch. And everyone just loses their minds over because they didn't expect that to happen. So the competitive aspect of it is amazing. The friendships that fighting games have formed over the last 3 decades is something that cannot be ignored. We're friends because of our love of fighting games.
It's true, actually. We met over one of our favorite fighting games, and ever since then, it just it's been like this for a while.
Yeah, so the year was 1991. February 6th of 1991, Capcom releases Street Fighter II The World Warrior, a massively important game to our culture because it's incredibly popular, but there were some things that led to that. So Street Fighter II obviously wasn't the first fighting game ever. It wasn't even the first Street Fighter ever.
That's true, believe it or not, there's one before that.
Yeah, so 1987, there's a guy, Takashi Nishiyama, was a prominent game designer over at Irem. He worked on the very first beat-em-up game, Kung Fu, known as Spartan X.
Right.
Based on a really popular movie, right?
I believe so, yeah, which I've only seen once, Meals on Wheels.
With Jackie Chan.
That's right.
Yeah, so he was picked up by Capcom to work on their various arcade titles. He actually headed up one of their teams. I believe it was development team number 2.
Yeah.
So he had worked on a game called Street Fighter, which kind of expanded on his ideas of Kung Fu, the video game. Where, that's a side-scrolling beat-em-up, but, you have all kinds of enemies coming at you, and you're using all kinds of martial arts.
In a way, kind of an evolution to it.
Yeah, they use all kinds of martial arts to fight off enemies, and Street Fighter is, like Kyo said, an expansion, an evolution of that, where it's all right, what other kind of martial arts styles can we incorporate in that? Because Nishiyama was a martial artist practitioner himself.
That's true, yeah.
So he wanted to bring that into this game, which was going to feature all kinds of world locales, all kinds of colorful characters with different backstories and complex movements, and that's how Street Fighter came to be.
And within that time as well, because he wanted to just do something that just wasn't just a simple martial arts game itself. So it was how can we expand this? How can we make this kind of like have an element of fantasy to it.
Yeah.
And so he would like just have the main character Ryu like have this move inspired by, of all things, Spaceship Yamato.
Oh, classic anime.
Yeah, the Hadouken, as everybody knows it as, the wave-emitting fist, which is straight from the Hada-O from Yamato, funny enough.
They're like the energy attack that the ship fought?
Yeah, that's the one.
Oh, and, wow.
Yeah, it's crazy. And just the way that if you were able to pull off these moves with, like, special weird input, weird at the time anyways, where it's just like, say, like a down, quarter circle forward and, like, punch, you would have this amazing attack that you, at the time, it was hard to do, but if you were able to pull this off, it would have just destroyed a chunk of the opponent's bar, yeah.
Yeah, because the moves are incredibly hard to pull off, and even more so with the early versions of the game. Now, if you're in the chat right now on the Twitch channel, which version of Street Fighter did you play? Did you play like the 6-button version that came out later, or the original version with these massive pads?
The original version, you say?
I only saw the original version once. It's like 2 big pads, one for punch and one for kick, and depending on how hard you pressed on it, would determine the power of the attack. So imagine trying to do whack-a-mole on an arcade board while doing quarter circles to do like a Hadouken, right?
Yeah.
So, like, the initial version of Street Fighter was actually kind of a failure because people couldn't figure out how to play the game.
Right.
Moreover, players were actually injuring each other. Like, when I play the game, I just, like, smash the freaking arcade board.
Like, as hard as you could, right?
Yeah, like, with enough power to cripple a small child, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, because I read that, like, if you hit it hard, it would do heart attacks. So, well, bam! Bam! Take that, birdie!
And I don't think there were, like, any warnings or anything on the machine anyway, so it's like...
So players got injured, people had bloody fists, which was nuts, so that version didn't work out, but Nishiyama came with this very innovative idea for the time. It's like, arcades up until that point only had, like, a joystick and 2 buttons. So he's like, what if we had, like, to represent the different power of the punch and kicks? What if we had, like, 6 buttons? 3 for punch, 3 for kick. So, like, the first arcade game to have a 6-button layout was the first ever Street Fighter, and that was Nishiyama's idea. So we're going to talk more about him throughout the panel, because he's an unsung hero in the video game industry. He doesn't do a lot of media appearances, he doesn't do a lot of interviews, he doesn't get a lot of praise, but he's a massive innovator in the world of video games.
Yeah, he's definitely, like, a lot more important than you would actually think, especially when you see what other things that he has done and is actually still doing to this very day.
Absolutely, yeah. He's currently running DIMPS, which we'll talk about the full circle of Nishiyama's career.
Yeah.
But, like, the second version of Street Fighter did a lot better, especially in the States, because the 6-button layout made it a lot easier for players to figure out how to play. They liked the ability to, like, do the different moves.
Yeah.
Controls were a lot smoother, so even though Street Fighter 1 was incredibly primitive as a fighting game, especially by modern standards, it was still popular enough that there was a demand for a sequel.
Oh, yeah. And around that time, they were doing, like, a lot of different ideas to the point where, while working on this potential, like, Street Fighter 2 sequel, they were kind of, like, dabbing into other genres at the time, since the life of the arcade was starting to, like, boom right back up. And at the time, Double Dragon from Technos, Japan, was just doing numbers completely.
It was a monster of a game at the time.
Oh, yeah. Like, the whole beat-em-up genre essentially can go tied back into this.
Yeah.
To the point where Capcom's like, what if we made our own version of Double Dragon? So, at a point, they were working on this amazing, like, brawler inspired by Streets of Fire.
Yeah.
Simply named Street Fighter 89.
Yeah. And there's differing stories of how this all came about.
Yeah.
Now, the big thing that's really important to note right at this time, after Street Fighter had come out, Nishiyama actually parted ways with Capcom. He had disagreements with his supervising director over how he should be running his projects, how he should be managing his teams. He wanted to give his teams creative freedom. Like, he would come up with the core idea, and then, like, all right, guys, you produce this, you work on it, you run it. He, like, wanted to raise, like, future leaders for the company of Capcom. But his supervising director had disagreements with him on that, so it's like, no, you gotta do it this way. Like, you're running the whole game, you're producing the whole game. You can't give all this freedom to your developers.
Right, yeah.
So, like, for that and many other reasons, Nishiyama actually left Capcom to go work at SNK. SNK actually picked him up and several other developers over from the original Street Fighter team to go work over at SNK, which would go on to make the Neo Geo. We'll talk about that in a hot second.
Yeah,
but there's varying stories. So one story was there was a planned immediate sequel for Street Fighter, which was going to be a fighting game.
Yeah.
Then, like...
Okamoto.
Like Kyo mentioned, Double Dragon was such a massive hit.
Yeah.
Like, the beat-up genre already launched with Kung Fu, then Renegade came out, then, like, Double Dragon was huge, because, like, well, what if two players at the same time moved around and just beat up the hell out of everyone that was in front of them? That was huge.
Especially with, like, the technology to have, like, amazing graphics and whatnot on the CPSs that Capcom built in-house to, like, house more memory, more RAM, to be able to put in, like, more details in the graphics, music, etc., etc.
Yeah, because with Double Dragon, if you put that on co-op, that thing chugged.
Oh, God,
It's like maybe like 2 frames a second if you had like more than 3 enemies on the screen at the same time.
It's one of our favorite games, but like I will be the first to admit that it's not a game that's easy for me to go back to.
Yeah. So Okamura liked to visit the U.S. arcades because, you know, Capcom was doing really big business in the States as well.
Yeah.
And Capcom USA started to have a big say on what projects Capcom Japan would do. So that's one of the reasons why they wanted to have Street Fighter 2 in the first place, was because Street Fighter 1 did so well in the States.
Yeah.
At least it exceeded their expectations, at least. So, like, Okamura was like, okay, when we go to the States, we're going to check out all these arcades and see what people are playing and how they're reacting. And they're just seeing people line up for hours at a time to play Double Dragon.
Yeah.
So they're like, there's something to this right here. So they go back to Japan, and Okamura claims that instead of making the fighting games, like, you know, I'm just going to do my own thing and make this beat 'em up. And then he pitches it over to Capcom, and Capcom's like, great, let's call it Street Fighter still. So the plan was to call it Street Fighter 89, which is what they did for a little bit of a time, but then when they actually started doing playtests, well, the stories kind of changed. So
it goes different ways with it, doesn't it?
Yeah. One story is that people rejected it because it didn't play like Street Fighter at all.
Yeah.
The other story is that it was rejected in Japan because Street Fighter had such a bad reputation that they're like, we don't want to play this other Street Fighter game.
Yeah.
So for whatever the reason that being, they ended up changing the name to Final Fight.
Which is crazy because, like, a lot of, like, there was even, like, a small bit of a side story where it's like everyone enjoyed the game, but they always kept hanging on, like, but how's it related to Street Fighter? Why is it Street Fighter? Why is it called Street Fighter? To which eventually led to them eventually calling it, like, Final Fight.
Yeah. And oddly enough, of course, as Street Fighter, the franchise progresses, the Final Fight characters start being pulled into that universe, which goes into, like, Alpha and beyond.
All the other, like, different sequels and prequels and, like, and whatnot.
The Final Fight did gangbusters. Like, it did really well. Because, like, one of the other things is, at the time, arcade vendors and manufacturers and operators had a huge say on, like, how arcade games were made. They would have feedback with companies like Capcom and so forth of like, well, this is what players like, this is what they don't like, here's how our business is doing. But Final Fight was a huge hit for 2 reasons. One, players could work together. Yeah. 2, because they're working together, they're dumping in money into the machines at the same time.
Cha-ching.
So vendors love that aspect. Plus, the machines' cabinets are smaller. Whereas if you play like something like Turtles or X-Men, the machines are massive, right?
Yeah, which they look cool and all, but you know, of course, it would take up a lot of room and whatnot. So having this small machine is not only just like it has enough like room for a little compact area, but hey, people can like also kind of see to it when it's not like completely sort of crowded over. If you know that, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, so like being able to make all that money while having limited, like taking up less space was great, and it played better than Double Dragon. It didn't have that slowdown. You had 3 different characters that you could play from. It moved at a faster pace. You had more enemies on screen. You had more carnage. You know,
the scrolling was smooth. It like the extra RAM definitely helped with. Like it's a lot of gameplay elements too. So it did well. It did great. So. Everything that they earned from Final Fight just went on to funding their eventual Street Fighter sequel that they wanted to work on. Yeah, because Capcom USA still wanted that Street Fighter 2, and there's still people at Capcom Japan that wanted it to happen. But the original team had left. They wanted to go to SNK. So Okamura is leading a whole new team of developers to make Street Fighter 2 from scratch. Yeah. Now, Ryu and Ken would show up, and Sagat would as well from the original game. Of course. But, like, everyone else was brand new. Blanca, Chun-Li, Bison, Barlock, Vega, Guile. And what's funny is, like, what I love about fighting games is that it draws inspiration from all aspects of pop culture. Comic books, anime, pro wrestling, movies, etc., etc. So Street Fighter 2 had some really fun inspirations, right, Kyo? That is right. I believe one of them would be from one of our favorite manga, Fist of the North Star, where Vega himself was based on, like, one of the actual, like, claw fighters.
Yep.
Like, where they're just like, well, we want to take the whole mask concept, but instead of that, we'll just kind of have him, like, a Spanish ninja. That's definitely out there. No one's ever done that before, so that's how Vega was created. Or, like, even JoJo's Bizarre Adventure for Guile, which, funny enough, his inspiration from the character Strawheim.
A cyborg Nazi.
Yeah.
So that was cool, too. And
he becomes the most American person in the entire game.
Yeah, even Zangief was based off, like, a random Fist of the North Star, like, thug that Kenshiro would fight. Even at one point, Ryu's character design was going to be more Kenshiro-like, with shoulder pads and stuff. They ended up scrapping it to have something more closer to a Street Fighter 1 look, but at a time, they're like, you know what, let's put the Kenshiro pads on.
Yeah.
So, like, it was massive on multiple levels. One, there was a strong emphasis on great background art, which at the time was considered an entry-level position at Capcom, but I feel like the backgrounds of Street Fighter and fighting games in general from that point forward, whether it be King of Fighters, Samurai Showdown, or Tekken, like, the backgrounds were always lively. I felt like that added to the atmosphere of fighting games.
It added a lot of personality to the character to help you become more attached to the character you want to be better with, too, like, later on down the line.
Yeah.
So having, like, these small stories where Ryu's just trying to, like, become stronger, or, like, Sagat, in this point, wants to get revenge on Ryu for that scar that he left in the first game.
Yeah. Another aspect is the music of Street Fighter 2. Very iconic. And this is very important because arcades traditionally are incredibly noisy places. So you have to have something that bops, that stands out. So there's a huge emphasis on sound effects, on drums, but having catchy tunes that are simple to get into. So coming onto this project is a young composer by the name of Yoko Shimomura. I think everyone knows her now for RPGs like Kingdom Hearts, Super Mario RPG, Final Fantasy 15, but like, her first big game was Street Fighter 2.
This was the one that she, like, pushed her limit, because funny enough, when she went into this, she wasn't super experienced in like, the actual composition of music. So she just kind of, like, studied small things here and there while working on other Capcom side projects, but then took on Street Fighter and said, how can I really push myself? How can I get this sound to, like, kind of tell a story of each character, of each stage and whatnot, you know?
Yeah. So she came up with some really light sounds that were, like, super catchy and very innovative, and definitely went against the grain of what the Capcom sound was, and she was afraid that her work would be rejected.
Yeah.
But, like, Aki-Man, who was leading the whole creative aspect, the art direction, all that, was like, this is amazing.
Yeah.
So, they let her have full reign, and, like, some songs she came up with, like, for specific countries or characters.
Yeah.
But other times she would come up with a theme, and then someone on the development team was like, I want that from Guile.
Yeah, exactly. Like, which, funny enough, like, and I think even to this day, she still says that, like, Ken's theme is just a complete coincidence how that happened.
Oh, yeah, because it sounds kind of like that
Mighty
one
Wings
from Top Gun, yeah. Which is hilarious.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm just trying to remember, like, I think she belted out, like, Blanca's theme, like, during a train ride to work or something like that.
Yeah.
Like, simple things just inspired her for this amazing, iconic soundtrack.
Absolutely. So, that was a cool aspect as well. Then the other thing is, like, you have these wild, crazy, cartoonish characters like Dazzum stretching across the screen.
Funny enough, eventually, like, at first I thought that with his giant limbs, wouldn't it be even funnier if it, like, just kept on getting, like, longer and everything within, like, each different build of the game that they were working on. And I think at that point they were trying to, like, impress one another, trying to one-up each other. Like, if it was funny, if it was amusing, then keep it in the game. Yeah. That's how the whole rule was.
Yeah, so there's all this crazy stuff going on with backgrounds. Elephants are in the back while you're fighting Dazzum, and he's teleporting and stretching his arms and legs out and shooting fire at you. Or you're in the Honda stage, which is a bathhouse with a sumo ring in the middle of it. So, like, all kinds of crazy stuff's going on in these games, so it's very eye-catching. It catches your ears. But then at the end of the day, the game has to play good, right?
Yeah, exactly, which is, of course, one of the main backbones of a fighting game in general. Yeah. So at that point, they always, like, kept on trying to, like, test certain things, like, if a certain punch can go on, or, like, if a frame would stay right there. Like, in a way, like, they accidentally created the combo system, thinking that it was a bug at some point in the vanilla version of Street Fighter 2. And then when they saw, like, how this was actually kind of fun to exploit, they're like, okay, but what if?
Yeah.
And so went forward, like, they just made it an actual staple into, like, the game, let alone the genre.
Yeah, accidental gameplay or incidental gameplay is always an amazing thing in video games. Yeah. But what's important is when the original Street Fighter came out, it was only like 8 players. You can select 8 characters. Everyone knows who they are. Everyone knows the dealio. There's millions of research articles and videos on the subject. But for me, I guess we'll talk about like our first experience playing Street Fighter 2 because I want to reflect on like the 30-year period. Like there's plenty of resources out there to cover the history of Street Fighter 2.
Yeah.
But, like there's a lot of things that make it great. But my first time I remember, we came out of movie theater.
Yeah.
We were at a movie, and in the lobby of the movie after we saw, I think it was like Batman Returns or something, right? With Michael Keaton.
Oh yeah, hey.
But like the whole family went, me, brother, mom, dad, etc. We went to the movie, had a great time. Then after the movie, we saw the arcade machines, and there was one machine that had a line for like about half a dozen people in the line. It's like, wow, what's that? And it's Street Fighter 2. So we got in line. We had our quarters because that's how you played games.
Yeah, that's right.
And
back in the day.
When it was my turn, I looked at all the different characters, and my name's Kent with a T. I saw Ken without a T. I'm like, you know what? Close enough. And I saw like the movesets printed on the board by the joystick, right?
Yeah.
So like, all right, Hadouken, and I don't know what the hell, Dragon Punch, Hurricane Kick were the move names in English.
What's a Tatsumaki?
Well, they were smart. Capcom was smart early on to make sure they used English names for the moves.
Yeah, that's right.
So you had like Fireball, you had Dragon Punch, you had Hurricane Kicks. Like, all right, that makes sense. Lightning Kick for Chun-Li.
Yeah.
Psycho Crusher, Super Headbutt. So Flash Kick, Sonic Boom.
Yeah.
So like, I see that, I'm like, all right, I'm gonna be Ken because that's close to my name, and I actually beat all the human players in line.
That's actually really cool.
And then eventually, like, it got to the computer player, and no one was good enough to beat Dalsum. So we kept losing to Dalsum. Then parents were like, all right, let's go home. So that was my first experience playing Street Fighter 2. What was yours, Kyo?
Funny enough, my first experience was at home with Street Fighter 2. So I played the Super NES port, and my brother just kind of brought this game home. Yeah. Because we were just playing, like sometimes we would borrow games from friends. Yeah. And when I got done playing whatever Tongue of the Fat Man was, that's an obscure game. He brought all over this game for our Super NES, and he was just like, it's pretty cool. It's called Street Fighter 2. I'm just like, oh, this looks kind of neat. And, like, I'm looking at all these different characters, and, like, I wanted to try out. I'm like, well, there's this dude with a bandana, and he just has this gi, and I was taking karate at the time. So I'm like, okay, I'll pick the karate guy. That looks really neat. Mm-hmm. And I'm just going around just jumping, doing all these cool kicks, just pressing buttons. Of course, I didn't know what I was doing. We didn't have any instruction manual, and being able to just throw a fireball by accident, I'm like, what was that? Yep. This dude just made fire come out. I want to do this again. And so, I kept doing this and I kept playing this. I kept messing around with different characters. I eventually got to, like, the one girl in the actual roster because I'm like, hey, she's the only girl there. That's pretty crazy. And I'm just like, whoa. Like, if I keep matching this, I just get my first move. And like, whoa, so that's a lightning kick. I wonder what other buttons do. And from there, trying to discover what each character did, how they felt, was the giant appeal to me where I'm like, I want to find more fighting games. Is there any other games that are like Street Fighter? That's crazy.
Yeah, for a while there weren't. So Street Fighter 2 came out in February, but that was really the only player on the market. I'm not going to count like Yair Kung Fu, because that game's bullshit. But later that same year, there would be a fighting game on the Neo Geo arcade unit. So, we're big Neo Geo fans. I have one of these right there.
Like,
look at that bad boy.
Look at that. But Neo Geo.
But like, we mentioned that. Let's see my notes here. We mentioned that Takashi Nishiyama left Capcom to go work at SNK.
That's right.
And part of that was spearheading the Neo Geo platform, which was a dope arcade platform where to save on costs, especially in like foreign markets like South America, Central America, and China, it's like, we'll have this arcade unit and then we'll sell cartridges to you that are much cheaper than buying a whole nother arcade unit.
That's right.
And you can have multiple slots, and you can just swap out the cartridges and have different games in there, whether it be puzzle games, sports games, action games, and then eventually fighting games. So, Nishiyama left Capcom, but he still wanted to do a fighting game to expand on his ideas from Kung Fu and Street Fighter. So, while Street Fighter 2 is being in development, he's also starting on his own fighting game called Fatal Fury, King of Fighters.
That's right. Garou Densetsu, the legendary Hungry Wolf.
So this is a big game for me because I'm a big Terry Bogard fan.
Of course.
The cartridge right here is actually the second fighting game I ever played. Street Fighter 2 being the first.
Why, when we first met, you were cosplaying Terry Bogard.
That's right, and you were cosplaying Kyo Kusanagi, which was not a Fatal Fury character, but Fatal Fury leads to King of Fighters.
That's right, so.
Yes. But, like, it was a cool game because, one, you have the plane shifting, so you had 2 rows, a foreground and a background.
Right.
And in the arcade version, you actually shift back and forth, so you can fight on 2 different planes.
That's right, which was mind-blowing at the time, too.
Yeah. Another cool thing is there's a 2-player co-op mode.
Yeah.
Everyone remembers Dramatic Battle from the original Street Fighter Alpha, but Fatal Fury did it first, where you can have 2 characters team up and fight all the different computer enemies from start to finish. There's also more of a developing storyline. Geese Howard kills Terry Bogard's father. Terry and Andy's father, they go on a pilgrimage to learn martial arts.
Right.
They come back with their friend, the Muay Thai. The Muay Thai fighter, and they, like, we're going to go back to Southtown and fight all of Geese's buddies. We're going to enter the King of Fighters tournament, and we're going to whoop Geese's ass and get our revenge and all that good stuff. So you have this story that's developing over time. Geese has no idea who these upstarts are, but he's starting to find out who they are as they progress through the tournament. And a lot of things that you, for better or for worse, from the original Street Fighter were there. So there's a strong emphasis on special moves as opposed to combos. But it's really hard to execute those moves. Yeah. Make game moves at a more methodical pace than Street Fighter 2. And oddly enough, even though Street Fighter was all about traveling the world and fighting different opponents, all the action is located in one city called Southtown.
That's right.
So you don't get all the foreign flair that you would have gotten from Street Fighter 2, The World Warrior. So.
But what I like about Southtown is that it felt like an actual bustling city as well. With like, you know, it was a melting pot of like different like cultures and different lives anyway. So even though you're not traveling the world, it just shows how like all sorts of different people would be in this town, and it even adds a greater weight to what Terry Bogard must do in order to like free his hometown from this man who's pretty much taken everything from him.
Yeah. But yeah, so that whole aspect of it is great. It's fun. Yeah. You only get to play as Terry, Andy, and Joe when you're playing the arcade version. They did put out a console version for all sorts of platforms like the Genesis and the Super Nintendo where it's funny, everything that made Fatal Fury unique, like the 2 playing system or doing co-op against CPU opponents for 3 players on the screen at the same time fighting each other, that was all taken out for the home version. So it's like one plane, one-on-one battles the whole time, no matter what. But you could play as all the other characters in the game that were only computer controlled in the arcade version. So it's kind of funny because like Fatal Fury to Nishimura is his version of Street Fighter 2. That's what he envisioned Street Fighter 2 to be and how he envisioned it to play compared to what Capcom came up with the new team led by Okamura. So when it goes out on consoles, it's like, okay, we're going to have it play more like Street Fighter 2.
So of course everybody's all like, this game is just trying to copy Street Fighter 2, when in reality both games are being worked on at the same time. Yeah. So they had no idea that Capcom was really doing this until like magazines started like talking about it, and then like, oh, that's interesting, but here's what I consider. So
Fatal Fury is going to come out no matter what, which makes me wonder, what if Street Fighter 2 never came out? Fatal Fury is still going to come out. Would Terry and Mai be like the iconic characters of fighting games, as opposed to like Ryu and Chun-Li?
Terry would have wound up in Fortnite by that logic, now that I think about it.
And then we would have had crazy versus games like Fatal Fury versus Street Fighter, or SNK versus Marvel.
Fatal Fury versus Tekken? That'll never happen.
There's no way you would have Fatal Fury characters in a Tekken game. That's just absurd.
Keith Howard versus Heihachi? No way.
No way. That would never happen.
No, dude.
But like, that was the year 1991, so the Neo Geo is more like the hardcore platform. It's for more the hardcore gamers. Yeah. You have to be super rich to even afford the home Neo Geo.
We barely had like a CD version of it.
So like, you know, Biggie Smalls, the Notorious B.I.G., he's like Super Nintendo, Sega Genesis, when I was dead, broke man, I couldn't picture this. But he wasn't rich enough to have a Neo Geo, because there's no Neo Geo bars in Juicy, you know, so you have to be super wealthy in order to afford the home version of that console. But like, it's a huge starting point for 1991. The success of Street Fighter 2 will lead to all sorts of like pirated versions, which would lead to like, you know, updated versions of games like Champion Edition, Super Turbo, etc., etc. There'll be sequels to Fatal Fury. Then SNK will start developing fighting games like Samurai Showdown, King of Fighters, Art of Fighting. Capcom would also respond with games like Darkstalkers, Rival Schools, etc., etc. Then other fighting game companies or other game developers would come with their own fighting games. Mortal Kombat, Killer Instinct, Primal Rage, and of course, Fighter's History.
Dude, oh, Fighter's History. A game that was so close to Street Fighter 2 that even Capcom said, we don't like that.
Yeah. So, like, that era was just a magical time. If you're a fighting game fan that grew up during the 90s, you knew of the culture. You remember going to the arcades, standing in line, putting down the quarter, making friendships, forming rivalries.
Oh, yeah.
Like, pretty much everything you saw in high school except getting the babes. That was fake.
That's all fictional. That doesn't happen.
But, like, everything else about that experience was super authentic and magical. Like, definitely a great time to grow up. A great way to grow up.
Oh, yeah.
And today, fighting games still go on. There's still magical experiences. SNK and Capcom are still at it.
They thrived.
Yeah, Street Fighter 5's finally good.
Took long enough.
King of Fighters 15's coming out. Just saw Terry in the trailer. That's going to be dope.
So beautiful.
Yeah, so there's a lot to be excited about fighting games. So hope to see you online on PSN. We only have a little bit of time left to wrap up the panel.
Yeah.
I'd love to talk more with you guys. Maybe we'll talk in the chat. You can follow me at Fist of the MFK on Twitter.
And you can follow me at Brotha Kyo on pretty much anything.
And I stream games over at twitch.tv/Ongaku Overdrive.
I also stream games over at twitch.tv/Brotha Kyo.
There you go. And every third Wednesday of the month, you can catch us over on the Ongaku Overdrive Twitch channel for Ongaku Fight Night. We play games online with you guys.
That's right.
And we get on Discord and talk about stuff as well. We just talk about fighting games all night.
Pretty much.
Yeah, so it's a super fun time. And I appreciate Super Bitfest for inviting us and having us out.
This was awesome.
And we hope to see you guys sometime in the future. Stay safe. Get them shots. Wash your hands. Wash your ass. Eat vegetables. And wear a mask when you go outside.
That's right. So you guys have a good one.
Go bang.